For thousands of years, we have been told a story, one that has shaped the very foundation of faith, history, and civilization itself. Abraham, the chosen one, the father of nations, the patriarch of monotheism. His name echoes through history, revered by billions. But what if the story we've been told is not the full truth? What if Abraham's origins stretch far beyond the sacred pages of the Bible? What if his journey was not just a spiritual calling, but a cosmic directive, one shaped not by divine revelation, but by powerful celestial beings who once walked the earth? Deep beneath the shifting sands of Mesopotamia, buried within ancient cuneiform tablets forgotten for millennia, lies a story far older than the Bible itself. These are not myths, they are historical records, written long before the Hebrew prophets walked the earth, telling of rulers not as unseen gods, but as beings of flesh and blood, wielding technology and knowledge beyond human comprehension. And at the center of this hidden history stands Abraham. But was he truly chosen by a singular, omnipotent deity? Or was he guided by an unseen hand, one that had been shaping humanity's spiritual evolution for millennia? The Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens, ruled over men, intermingled with them, and shaped the very course of human destiny. Their influence was so profound that their stories were later absorbed, reshaped, and repurposed into the religious doctrines we now accept as divine truth. What if Abraham was not merely a man of faith, but a key figure in an ancient, interstellar plan, one that would redefine the human understanding of the cosmos? If this is your first time on the channel, subscribe now and turn on notifications, because the truth that has been buried for thousands of years is finally coming to light. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Comment below with the number 7 if you've always felt that history holds deeper secrets than we've been told. Let me know your thoughts, and let's uncover the truth together. In the deserts of ancient Mesopotamia, beneath the shifting sands of time, lie forgotten relics of the past. Tablets carved in cuneiform, their cryptic inscriptions revealing secrets that challenge everything we think we know. These are not mere myths or legends. They are records of civilizations that predate the biblical era, stories written long before the Hebrew prophets walked the earth. They speak of divine rulers, not ethereal, distant gods, but beings of flesh and blood, wielding knowledge and technology beyond human comprehension. The Sumerians, the first known civilization, chronicled their encounters with these celestial figures, whom they called the Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens. They ruled over men, intermingled with them, and shaped the very course of human destiny. And at the center of these revelations stands Abraham, the man revered as the father of monotheism. But was Abraham truly chosen by a singular omnipotent deity? Or was he guided by an unseen hand, one that had been shaping humanity's spiritual evolution for millennia? The deeper we dig, the more unsettling the questions become. The Anunnaki were not mere figments of Sumerian imagination. They were described in intricate detail as architects of civilization, as beings who passed down knowledge of the heavens, agriculture, mathematics, and even genetic lineage. Their influence was so profound that their stories were later absorbed, reshaped, and repurposed into the religious doctrines we now accept as divine truth. What if Abraham was not merely a man of faith, but a key figure in an ancient plan, one that would redefine the human understanding of the cosmos? What if his covenant was not with the singular God we've been told to believe in, but with a force far older, far more complex, and far more intertwined with the affairs of humanity than we ever imagined? As the Sumerian tablets reveal, Abraham was not just an isolated figure who emerged out of the void. He was born into a world dominated by these celestial rulers, a world where the line between man and God was blurred by the presence of the Anunnaki, whose legacies would ripple through time, shaping the very fabric of our beliefs. The truth has been buried, hidden beneath layers of theology and doctrine, rewritten to fit the narrative of religious institutions. But the evidence remains, waiting to be uncovered. To understand who Abraham truly was, we must journey back to where it all began, back to the cradle of civilization, back to the moment when the divine and the mortal stood face to face. Only then will we see the full picture. Only then will we begin to understand the truth. Abraham was not born in the Holy Land. He was not from Canaan. No, he was born in Ur, the most powerful city of ancient Sumer, a metropolis that stood as a beacon of civilization when most of the world was still lost in the shadows of primitive existence. It was a city of immense knowledge, innovation, and religious devotion, where towering structures pierced the sky and the whispers of the gods echoed through its ziggurats. And at the heart of Ur stood its greatest monument, a ziggurat dedicated to its ruling god, Nannar, Sin, the moon god. This temple was more than just a place of worship. It was a center of power, a place where divine will was interpreted, where kings sought favor, and where priests held the secrets of the heavens. But the Sumerians did not believe Nannar was simply a god in the way we understand deity today. No, Nannar was something far more tangible, far more real. He was an Anunnaki, one of those who had descended from the stars, a ruler who walked among men and guided the fate of nations. Unlike the abstract, unseen gods of later religions, the Anunnaki were present. They had form, they had purpose, and their presence shaped the world as it was known. And it was within this world, within the shadow of the great ziggurat of Ur, that Abraham was born. His father, Terah, was not a common man. He was a high priest, an elite figure who stood at the crossroads of power, acting as both a spiritual and political figure. Terah was among those who carried out the sacred rituals in the name of Nannar, interpreting divine messages, offering sacrifices, and maintaining the celestial order that governed Sumer. He was no mere devotee. He was a man of deep knowledge, a guardian of ancient traditions that predated even the Sumerian kings. And so, Abraham was raised not just as an ordinary child, but as a descendant of a priestly bloodline, a lineage that had long served the Anunnaki and maintained their earthly influence. In the world Abraham knew, the gods were not distant beings who existed in the heavens, unseen and unknowable. They were tangible. They were rulers who lived among men, dictated laws, and engaged in the affairs of humanity. The cities of Mesopotamia flourished under their guidance. The Sumerians credited their advancements in agriculture, astronomy, mathematics, and law not to human ingenuity, but to the wisdom passed down by the Anunnaki. They believed their rulers were chosen, if not outright sired, by these celestial beings, creating a divine lineage that governed with knowledge beyond human comprehension. And in this world, Abraham was raised to understand the divine, not as something mystical, but as something present, powerful, and absolute. But something changed. Something shattered the order of things. A war was coming. Ur was a city built upon stability, its power rooted in its unwavering devotion to the gods. But beneath this surface lay deep rivalries, tensions that had been brewing for centuries among the Anunnaki factions. For generations, the world had been ruled by the House of Enlil, with Nannar, his son, maintaining control over Ur. But there were others, rivals who had been cast out, those who sought to challenge the rule of the old gods. Among them was Marduk, an Anunnaki who had once been exiled, a being who had waited in the shadows for his time to rise. His followers, those who had been denied power under the Enlilite rule, began to spread his name in secret, gathering strength, whispering of rebellion. Marduk did not wish to share power. He sought to claim it all, to establish his dominance over the lands of Sumer, to usurp the gods who had ruled before him. And then, Ur began to fall. The war was not fought with swords alone. It was fought in the heavens, among the stars, and upon the very ground Abraham walked. Temples were desecrated. The old order was collapsing. Nannar's hold over Ur was weakening. The priesthood, including Terah, was caught in the storm, forced to choose sides in a battle that was beyond mortal comprehension. Those who remained loyal to Nannar, to the old ways, saw their power slipping. And in the midst of this chaos, Terah saw the inevitable. Ur was doomed. It was then that Terah made a decision that would change the fate of history. He took his family and fled northward, away from the burning city, away from the crumbling temples. He did not seek refuge in just any land. He chose Haran, a city that still worshipped Nannar, a city that had been built as a northern outpost, mirroring the spiritual and political structure of Ur. In Haran, Terah believed he could preserve what was left of the old faith, to maintain the connection with the gods who had ruled for millennia. But destiny had other plans. It was in Haran that Abraham's true journey began. If he had remained in Ur, he might have simply followed in his father's footsteps, another high priest in a long line of men devoted to Nannar. But something or someone, called him away. The Bible tells us that Yahweh spoke to him, commanding him to leave his father's house and travel to a new land. But was it truly Yahweh? Or was it another voice, one that had been guiding the destiny of humanity since the beginning? For Abraham did not simply wander. His journey followed a precise and deliberate path, aligning with the great Anunnaki sites of the ancient world. Shechem, Bethel, Mount Moriah. These were not random locations. They were places of power, places where the gods once walked, where divine energy was believed to flow, where the boundaries between heaven and earth blurred. And then he went further, to the Negev, to the Sinai Peninsula. The answer lies in what some believe to be the greatest secret of all. Sinai was home to an Anunnaki spaceport. Ancient texts speak of a place where the gods ascended and descended, where ships from the heavens came and went, a place of celestial gateways. Abraham's journey was not about finding a new land for his people. It was about securing something far more important. It was about maintaining control over a place that had been sacred to the Anunnaki since the dawn of time. And then came the War of Kings, a battle not just between men, but between the rival factions of the gods themselves. In Genesis 14, we are told of the great conflict of Eastern kings who waged war against Canaanite rulers. But was this truly a mere human struggle? Or was it a reflection of the greater Anunnaki battle for control over Earth? And Abraham, was he merely an observer? Or was he a chosen enforcer carrying out a cosmic directive? And then came the final devastation. Sodom and Gomorrah, destroyed in fire and brimstone, wiped from existence in an instant. The Bible calls it divine wrath. But could it have been something else? A weapon? A cleansing of the old world to make way for the new? Some researchers suggest that the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was not a mere act of divine punishment, but a tactical strike, a final battle in the war of the gods, a moment when the Anunnaki used their true power. Abraham witnessed it all. And from the ashes of these ancient battles, a new world emerged, one ruled no longer by many gods, but by one. Or so we were told. Because beneath the surface of the Bible's stories lies another truth, one that has been hidden, buried, waiting to be uncovered. Abraham's journey was not just the birth of monotheism, it was the transformation of an ancient celestial order, and the echoes of that transformation still shape our world today. By the time Abraham was a young man, Ur was in chaos. The once glorious capital of Sumer, a city that had stood as a beacon of divine order and civilization, was now unraveling. The great Sumerian Empire was collapsing, not only from internal strife, but from a celestial conflict far greater than any mortal war. The priest kings who had long ruled in the name of the Anunnaki were losing their grip on power, their once unquestioned authority being challenged from within and without. And beyond the crumbling ziggurats and burning temples, there was an even greater war, a war among the gods themselves. The Anunnaki were in conflict. Some still upheld the ancient ways, preserving the balance of power established in the heavens and on earth. But others sought dominion, a new world order where one god would reign supreme, unchallenged by his brothers and rivals. And at the center of this cosmic struggle stood a name that would change everything: Marduk. Once an exiled figure, cast out by the ruling pantheon of the Enlilite faction, Marduk, the rebellious Anunnaki, the one who would be king of Earth, had returned. His ambition was not simply to reclaim his former seat of power, but to dismantle the hierarchy that had existed since the beginning of time, to overthrow the gods who had ruled before him, to elevate himself as the singular deity above all others. For centuries, he had plotted from the shadows, gathering followers, whispering into the ears of rulers, slowly eroding the influence of his enemies. And now he was ready to make his move. His uprising was swift, merciless, and absolute. Cities once devoted to the Enlilite gods fell one by one as Marduk's influence spread like wildfire. Temples were burned, priesthoods were dismantled, and the old order was cast aside. Kings who had once ruled in the name of Nannar, Enlil, and Anu were forced to swear fealty to Marduk or be destroyed. The once unshakable foundation of Sumer was now trembling, its people divided between those who clung to the gods of old and those who embraced the new age of Mardukian rule. The power struggle that had begun in the heavens had now erupted on earth, and the world was caught in the crossfire. For Terah, Abraham's father, the signs were clear. Was doomed. As a high priest of Nannar, he was part of a vanishing world, a man who had dedicated his life to the service of an Anunnaki god whose time was quickly fading. The once mighty city of the jewel of the Sumerian civilization, was no longer safe. The gods who had protected it were retreating, their presence diminishing, their influence crumbling. To stay was to perish. To resist was to invite annihilation. The cities that refused to bow to Marduk were razed, their temples desecrated, their rulers executed. The priesthoods of Enlil, Nannar, and Enki were forced into exile, fleeing across the lands in search of refuge, hoping to preserve what little remained of the old divine order. And so, Terra made his choice. He gathered his family and fled. But he did not flee aimlessly. He did not choose an arbitrary place of refuge. He chose Haran. Haran was no mere city. It was a mirror of a northern outpost built in the image of the great metropolis, a stronghold of those who still remained loyal to Nannar, the moon god. If there was one place where the old ways could endure, it was here. Unlike which was now under siege, Haran still stood as a bastion of Anunnaki influence, untouched by the tides of war that had engulfed Sumer. The ziggurat of Nannar still rose high, its priests still performed the sacred rituals, its people still upheld the ancient ways. And for Terra, this was the last sanctuary. But even as he settled his family in Haran, even as he sought to rebuild what had been lost, fate had other plans. The forces that had upended the world were not done. The Great Migration from was not just a flight from destruction. It was a transition, a transformation, a bridge between the dying world of the Anunnaki and the new world that was about to emerge. For Abraham, this journey was not just about survival. It was about destiny. It was in Haran that Abraham began to hear the call. A voice, a command, a directive from beyond the veil of human comprehension. The Bible tells us that Yahweh spoke to him, instructing him to leave his father's house and travel to a new land. But who or what was truly speaking to Abraham? Was this Yahweh, the monotheistic God of the Bible, or was this one of the Anunnaki, guiding him toward a mission far greater than any mortal could understand? Abraham's journey would not be a simple one. He was not merely leading a family, he was carrying a legacy, a tradition that stretched back to the dawn of civilization, to the very origins of humanity itself. And though he did not know it yet, his path was already written, inscribed not in scripture, but in the stars. His journey was not aimless. His path was meticulously aligned with the great power centers of the ancient world. He would travel to Shechem, to Bethel, to Mount Moriah, places where the Anunnaki once walked, places where the veil between heaven and earth was thinnest, places where the energy of the gods still lingered. He was moving along a celestial map, following a course set forth by something or someone far beyond human understanding. And then he would reach the Sinai Peninsula. Why did he go there? Why travel to a place so barren, so desolate? The answer, as some ancient texts suggest, is because Sinai was home to something far more significant than mere sand and stone. It was home to an Anunnaki spaceport, a place where the gods had descended and ascended, where ships from the heavens came and went, where the fate of Earth was determined by beings who had ruled since time immemorial. Abraham's journey was not about wandering. It was about securing something far greater than land. It was about ensuring that the legacy of the Anunnaki remained intact, that their influence continued, that their will endured. He was not just a prophet, he was a vessel for something beyond himself, an instrument of a design that had been set in motion long before he was born. And as he moved forward, as he crossed the lands of Canaan, as he built altars and claimed dominion, he was not just founding a faith, he was fulfilling an ancient directive. A directive that would shape the course of history. A directive that would change the world forever. Abraham's journey was not one of blind faith, nor was it merely a quest for a promised land. It was something far more deliberate, something orchestrated by forces far older than the monotheistic God we have been taught to revere. Every step he took was precise, calculated, aligned with ancient centers of power, places not chosen at random, but dictated by an intelligence that transcended human understanding. The Bible tells us that Yahweh spoke to Abraham, commanding him to leave his father's house, to journey into the unknown, to establish a new covenant. But what if this voice was not the Yahweh we imagine? What if this voice belonged to one of the Anunnaki, a celestial ruler who sought to ensure that control over Earth's most sacred sites remained in the right hands? The locations that Abraham passed through were not mere resting places. They were ancient power centers, connected by an invisible network that stretched back to the earliest days of civilization. Shechem, a place of divine convergence, a city where the energies of the gods once flowed freely. Bethel, literally translated as House of God, a site that served as a beacon for those who understood the old ways. A place where altars were built to communicate with those who had come from the heavens. Mount Moriah, a high place of supreme significance, where the boundaries between the divine and the mortal world were believed to dissolve. Abraham did not stumble upon these places by chance. He was following an ancient path, a celestial map laid out by the gods themselves. And then he arrived at the Sinai Peninsula. Why did he go there? What was waiting for him in this desolate expanse of sand and stone? The answer is both shocking and undeniable. Sinai was home to something far greater than any earthly kingdom. It was home to an Anunnaki spaceport. Ancient texts, inscribed long before the Bible was even conceived, speak of a place where the gods descended and ascended, a place where chariots of fire, a phrase later mistranslated and misunderstood, rose from the earth and disappeared into the heavens. The Sumerians, the Babylonians, and even the later Israelites all recorded stories of divine beings using Sinai as a point of departure, a gateway between Earth and the stars. Could it be that Abraham's true mission was not simply to settle in Canaan, but to protect something of far greater importance, a technology, a power source, a relic of the gods that had remained hidden for millennia? His presence in Sinai was not that of a wanderer, but of a guardian, a man chosen, not by an abstract deity, but by those who had ruled long before him, those who had shaped the destiny of humankind since its inception. Abraham was not just forging a faith. He was securing an ancient legacy, a divine directive passed down through generations, ensuring that the knowledge of the Anunnaki, their dominion over the earth, and their connection to the cosmos would not be lost. And this mission, hidden beneath layers of theological doctrine, would alter the course of history forever. The War of the Kings, described in Genesis 14, was far more than a battle between human rulers. It echoes a much older conflict found in Sumerian records, where rival Anunnaki factions waged wars over control of Earth's sacred sites. Just as Enlil and Marduk clashed over dominion in Mesopotamian mythology, human kings were drawn into a larger struggle, one where Abraham was not a mere bystander, but an enforcer, ensuring the correct faction retained control over Canaan's strategic locations. It was a war not just for territory, but for control over Earth's most sacred sites, its energy centers, and its destiny. The Eastern kings, Amraphel, Arioch, Kedorlaomer, and Tidal, were not merely ambitious warlords. They were aligned with a faction of the Anunnaki that sought to reclaim dominance over the lands once ruled by their celestial ancestors. On the other side, the Canaanite kings, defenders of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela, were not simply local rulers protecting their cities. They were serving another agenda, standing as obstacles in a power struggle that extended beyond the physical realm. This was no ordinary war. This was a battle for the future of Earth itself. Abraham was caught in the middle, but he was not merely a bystander. The Bible portrays him as a leader who rallied his forces to rescue his nephew Lot. But what if this was only part of the truth? What if Abraham was an enforcer, a chosen operative acting under the guidance of the Anunnaki? His military campaign was not a simple rescue mission. It was a strategic maneuver, ensuring that control over the region remained in the hands of those aligned with his true purpose. With 318 trained men, Abraham launched a tactical strike, pursuing the retreating forces all the way to Dan, an area long associated with divine encounters and celestial intervention. But how could a single man and a small force achieve victory over multiple kings and their armies? Unless, of course, he had assistance, guidance, technology, or favor from those who had walked the earth long before humans rose to power. Abraham's true role in this war was far more than that of a simple warrior. He was a diplomat, a conduit between human rulers and celestial forces, a man whose very existence ensured that the balance of power remained intact. the Canaanite kings had strayed too far, aligning themselves with forces that opposed the ancient order. If they succeeded in maintaining their hold over the region, it would threaten the delicate plan that had been unfolding for thousands of years. Abraham's intervention was not just a victory, it was a message, a declaration that the Anunnaki still held dominion over the fate of humankind. And then came his meeting with Melchizedek, the mysterious priest king of Salem. The Bible tells us that Melchizedek blessed Abraham in the name of El Elyon, the Most High God. But what if Melchizedek was more than a simple priest? What if he was a direct emissary of the Anunnaki, ensuring that Abraham remained aligned with the celestial order? What if this blessing was not just religious, but a confirmation of a mission completed, a sign that Abraham had upheld his role as an instrument of divine will? The War of the Kings was not just an ancient battle. It was a struggle between higher powers, a contest for dominion over earth, fought through the hands of men, but orchestrated by forces far beyond human comprehension. And in the center of it all stood Abraham, the warrior, the enforcer, the chosen one. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah has long been interpreted as divine punishment, a manifestation of God's wrath against the wickedness of mankind. But what if the truth is far more terrifying? What if the fire and brimstone that rained down upon these cities were not acts of divine retribution, but the detonation of an ancient advanced weapon, something so powerful, so destructive, that it erased all traces of life in an instant? The biblical description of the event is eerily similar to accounts of nuclear explosions in modern history. A blinding flash, a wave of fire that scorched the earth, an immense force that turned entire cities into ash, and a lingering poison that rendered the land uninhabitable. But these descriptions did not originate with the Bible. Centuries before the Hebrew scriptures were written, the Sumerians recorded a catastrophe strikingly similar in nature, one tied not to moral failings but to the conflicts of the gods. Ancient Mesopotamian texts speak of a war between the Anunnaki, a battle that escalated beyond the realm of kings and priests into something far more apocalyptic. According to these records, Enlil and Enki, two of the most powerful Anunnaki deities, stood on opposing sides of a cosmic struggle. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were not merely settlements of sinful men, as religious doctrine suggests. They were strategic locations, key points in a vast network of power and influence. Some theorists speculate that Sodom and Gomorrah housed advanced facilities, possibly even remnants of Anunnaki technology, something that had to be eliminated before it fell into the wrong hands. The decision to destroy these cities, then, may not have been about punishing humanity, but preventing knowledge or technology from being misused by rival factions. The effects of the destruction tell us even more. The land around the Dead Sea still bears strange anomalies, high levels of radiation, charred stone formations, and evidence of extreme temperatures that no natural fire could produce. The very ground itself was transformed into a barren wasteland, much like the radioactive deserts left in the wake of modern nuclear tests. Could it be that what we read as a biblical warning was actually a historical record of an ancient atomic event? Could the firestorm that engulfed Sodom and Gomorrah have been the result of a weapon so powerful that its effects lingered for centuries? And then there is Abraham, the man who had been moving strategically through regions of great Anunnaki significance, the man who had been tasked with securing ancient sites. Was he merely an observer, or was he being positioned to witness something of monumental importance? The Bible tells us that Abraham stood at a distance and watched the destruction unfold. But how did he know exactly when and where to look? Was he warned? Was he protected? If so, by whom? The origins of monotheism did not emerge in isolation, nor were they the result of a sudden divine revelation. Instead, they were part of a deliberate transformation, a restructuring of an ancient celestial order that had governed humanity since the dawn of civilization. Abraham's journey, the covenants he established, and the rituals he introduced were not original. They were adaptations of far older traditions, carefully repackaged and rebranded into a singular belief system. Before the concept of one Almighty God, the world was ruled by many. The Anunnaki, celestial beings who shaped early civilizations, handed down laws, and positioned kings as intermediaries between the heavens and earth. The Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians all recorded the rule of these gods, their conflicts, their hierarchies. The transition from polytheism to monotheism was not an abandonment of the old ways, but a consolidation of divine authority. Ancient Mesopotamian texts, such as the Enuma Elish, describe how Marduk rose to power by overthrowing the older gods, reshaping divine rulership into a more centralized system. This mirrors Abraham's shift from a pantheon of deities to a single, supreme god, a transformation that may have been influenced by Anunnaki politics, not divine revelation. When Abraham introduced the idea of a singular deity, he was not revealing a new truth. He was distilling the power structure of the Anunnaki into a form that could be controlled, understood, and enforced by a chosen few. Even the covenant Abraham made with God was not unique. Ancient Mesopotamian contracts, such as the Kudurru inscriptions of Babylon, reveal how kings swore loyalty to their divine patrons in exchange for protection, prosperity, and legitimacy. These agreements were carved in stone and placed in temples, much like Abraham's covenant, which set his people apart through circumcision, a ritual already practiced in Sumerian religious traditions. This was not a relationship built on faith alone. It was a structured alliance, a system where obedience was rewarded with favor and defiance was met with destruction. The rituals that accompanied these agreements further reinforced this connection. The practice of circumcision, which Abraham is said to have instituted as a mark of the covenant, was not an original concept. It was a practice already established in Sumerian culture, a symbol of devotion to the gods, a rite that signified belonging to a divine order. If Abraham's monotheism was truly an unprecedented revelation, why do its most sacred traditions mirror those of the Anunnaki? Why do the structures of divine governance found in the Bible align so perfectly with the celestial kingship system described in Mesopotamian texts? The very name Hebrew, Ibri, may provide yet another clue. Some researchers suggest that the term is derived from the Sumerian city of Nippur, the spiritual and administrative center of the Anunnaki. If true, this would mean that Abraham was not just an ordinary man chosen by God, but rather a descendant of a priestly and royal lineage, one deeply connected to the ruling elite of ancient Sumer, one that carried the knowledge, traditions, and genetic heritage of those who once served the Anunnaki directly. His mission, then, was not to forge a new path, but to preserve an ancient legacy under a new guise, one that would outlast the gods themselves. And so we must ask, if everything we know, everything we believe traces back to the Anunnaki, then what else have we been misled about? The Bible tells us that Abraham was chosen by one God, but history suggests he was shaped by many gods. The transition from polytheism to monotheism was not a revelation. It was a carefully constructed transformation, orchestrated to conceal the true origins of divine rule. The sands of Sumer still hold the answers, buried beneath the ruins of forgotten temples and inscribed on clay tablets that speak of a world where gods and men walked side by side. The truth has been rewritten, reshaped, repackaged, but it has not been erased. And if we are willing to uncover it, to challenge what we have been told, then perhaps we will finally see the full picture. If our faith, our history, our very understanding of God is built upon the foundations laid by the Anunnaki, then what other truths have been hidden from us? The truth is buried in the sands of Sumer, in the forgotten tablets of Mesopotamia. If you want to uncover more, watch my next video. Because the mystery doesn't stop here.